And welcome to another episode of Second Saints. John Hendricks alongside Ross Jackson. Hope everybody had a great Christmas and hope you didn't get too much Grinch action other than that Saints game that we had to sit through on Monday Night Football. But Ross, how's it going, my man? How was your Christmas?
Great, man. Great. Glad to be home, though. But it was very nice to get some family time in and enjoy that throughout the week. And so, but grateful to be back and grateful to be ready to wrap up this season for the New Orleans Saints. How's everything going for you, man?
Going great, man. The kids got spoiled. I've never seen so much Lego in my life, and so it's always a good time when they get spoiled. And my oldest, his birthday's New Year's Eve, so
Oh, it's
got
my
that around the
stepdad's
corner.
birthday.
Okay, cool. Nice,
It's
nice.
awesome.
So yeah, it's it'll be a nice little gift when he gets older. So it'll be
Hmm.
fun. But yeah, man, everything's great. And look, we're chugging along. It's hard to think this is probably our second to last show of 2024. It's been a crazy year. And
Wild.
I mean, there's a game we get a preview like we have done, every week and such. And look,
Okay.
it's the Raiders and the Saints. And again, we'll talk about this game in so many ways we might talk about it without talking about it. But I really want to kind of start here because what's fresh right now
Hmm.
is, and what's kind of the hot topic, hot button is the Saints head coaching search, right? And we've
Yep.
heard plenty of things. You've previewed candidates. I previewed candidates. We've talked about, Aaron Glenn probably being the front runner here. Joe Brady is obviously the betting favorite right now. Darren Rizzi may not have the most realistic shot, depending on how these final two games go. Then you're looking at Mike Vrabel as another guy that's on there. But look, the main thing is as a report came out from NFL Network, or their story rather, talking
Hmm.
about Mickey Loomis is tending to sit with familiarity, and that would possibly mean that Aaron Glenn's the next head coach of the Saints. Probably not that surprising. I think that's kind of tracking with what we've kind of heard as him in the driver's seat, if you will. But your
Hmm.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm with you. It's not surprising, and by no means do I think that Aaron Glenn, in particular, is a bad prospect for this coaching search or as the next head coach. As it sounds like John and I were talking before we hit record, and I was saying that it feels like the Saints are kind of soft launching um, Aaron Glenn a little bit. They've got Jonathan Vilma out there giving interviews saying that he believes that Aaron Glenn should be the guy. The NFL's playing up a bunch of like him riling up the locker room and giving pre-game speeches, post-game speeches, halftime speeches, stuff like that. And then now you have all these little stories that are coming out that are suggesting the Saints kind of going with familiarity and naming Aaron Glenn and all these other things. It feels like this is just a soft opening, like a friends and family opening for Aaron Glenn so far. And I don't think that's a bad thing. That's not the direction I think the Saints should go, however.
Right.
So it's two different things, right? I think that the hire could be the best hire in terms of the group of familiarity hires. But I think the Saints should go away from familiarity and really turn the page like they did back in 2006, continuing to go back to try to grab coaches that are a part of the former glory. I think is going to end up just recycling the same thing, right?
Yeah.
And provide and producing similar results. I think the biggest thing that the Saints can do moving ahead now is turn the page, go to somebody completely new, someone that they don't have an existing relationship with, and go and grab the best candidate from outside of the facility as they can.
Yeah, and I think as we get into the offseason, I'm very curious to see if me and you are kind of on the same wavelength, because I've got my guy kind of mapped out already, and it's nobody's really talking about him. But I'm also
Mhm.
writing about it on Saints News Network. But I don't know. I'm interested. I'm going to narrow it down to a couple. And look, I think Glenn is probably the most, most that's the most relatable character or coach that they could get, right, for this particular job. I mean, he makes the most sense. Mike Vrabel, I liked the concept when I previewed. I think he was one of the top tier guys. I feel like, he came in Tennessee. He really rebuilt that culture and kind of ended up making a real smash mouth team. I really liked him because he's a no nonsense type of guy. But realistically, what we're talking about here is a defensive guy coming in to be with the Saints and maybe fix their defense. I mean, that means the entire defensive staff is probably going to get overhaul if that happens. Maybe it signifies the offense might stay in place. Like they may like the
Mhm.
offense where it's going enough, maybe change out a few of the pieces. But, you know, I guess for those who are looking at Aaron Glenn or a defensive minded coach, is this a Dennis Allen 2.0? You know what I mean? I think that's the biggest
Right.
thing. And I don't think it's fair to Aaron Glenn, but
No.
are we looking at for fans? Or that's the easy way is like, well, this is just going to be Dennis Allen all over again.
Yeah, yeah, and I understand that because they've seen a defensive head coach in their time, and so now that's how every defensive coach is. But if you look at the NFL playoffs at the moment, I think it's the majority of teams in playoff position at the moment are non-offensive head coaches right now, and so to say that having a defensive head coach puts you at a disadvantage. There's just not really any evidence to that. You look at, Sean McDermott with the Buffalo Bills. You look at special teams guys like the Harbaugh brothers who are both in the playoffs. You look at Pittsburgh. You look at Houston. Like almost the entirety of the AFC is either defense for special teams head coaches. And then you look over at the NFC with Detroit. You look at and Atlanta. Those are two that are non. Oh, sorry, and Washington actually with Dan Quinn
Mhm.
are all non-offensive head coaches. And so you can find success with a head coach that's not an offensive head coach. The issue that becomes the challenge is, can you replace your offensive coordinator every time that you find an offensive coordinator that is successful and they get 1 year and then they become a coach somewhere else in today's day and age? That's going to be the tricky part. But I think that Aaron Glenn is miles different than Dennis Allen. They just happen to both coach the same side of the football, and they both happen to have spent some time with Sean Payton here in New Orleans. I don't think that automatically should make Aaron Glenn a bad candidate. I just think that the Saints should kind of go outside of their comfort zone for a change.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that's the biggest thing, and of course, we're all assuming that Mickey is the guy that leads this charge. Which, look, I think if we're being real here, that's what's going to happen. Is
Yeah.
Mickey's going to end up being the guy that puts the next head coach? They'll give him another couple of years, and if it doesn't work out, then they will probably blow this thing up, right? Like I
Yep.
just think, again, we said it on the stream. I've wrote about it. You've been vocal about it. I just feel like the operation here is we can be good enough to compete in a crappy division, and that's our kind of bar. But I mean, they can't even get there. That's the problem. And
Right.
so, look, the defense has been a major letdown. The defense is a problem. And so, if you don't hire a defensive head coach, which should presumably mean that they're going to do the defensive coordinator job, all this other stuff, where does that leave you next year? Because I don't know that you have the answer on your current coaching staff on who's going to run your defense, right? Like, I think there's some logic you could come up with, say, okay, maybe they need to reinvest or do some different things there. And defensively, what does their roster look like next year? I mean, there's just so many moving parts and pieces. I wouldn't be mad at a defensive head coach. You know what I mean? Like, I
Mhm.
don't think that's a bad formula and recipe. Like, I get it. Ben Johnson, I think in a lot of ways, him and the Lions, I'm not so sure he leaves unless it's his perfect opportunity. And it depends if lines are really close or not. You know what I mean? I think that's the other thing.
Right.
And here's the other part. Aaron Glenn has to say yes to the Saints
Right.
too, right? Like
Yep.
you could see
Yep.
and look at it and be like, I don't want that situation right now. You know what I mean? And so that's another thing to consider here. But again, familiarity, it seems like this is kind of in what we believe or what we've seen from the team and kind of what we know is true of how they operate. That tends to be the thought process. That looks like the direction they would go, which would make the most sense.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And look, some of the things that I think that make Aaron Glenn different, I think that he comes off to me as a better vocal leader than Dennis Allen. He comes off to me as somebody that, of course, has that um, former NFL player experience. Which, by the way, one of the teams that he played for, the New York Jets, they have a head coach opening too. So the New Orleans Saints are not going to be the only ones interested in familiarity when it comes to that. There's a good chance that he ends up in New York just as much as there's a good chance that he ends up in New Orleans. So something to keep in mind there too. And then I think too, just like his ability to kind of do what he's done with this Detroit defense, despite all the injuries that they've had over on that side of the football, is actually kind of tailor made for what the New Orleans Saints just consistently experience on a year in and year out basis. I mean, the injuries that they face are just kind of wild. And if you're going to bring somebody in that has some experience in navigating that, I guess that there's some that there's some value in that as well. And so I think that Aaron Glenn is a wildly different, or would be a wildly different head coach than Dennis Allen was. They just happen to coach the same side of the football.
Right. And look, to be fair, whatever head coach comes in here, they're inheriting a pretty tough situation, right?
It's not
Like,
great.
I think that Aaron Glenn could go to a better situation to be a more successful head coach than he can in New Orleans. That's just my 2 pennies, right? And I just think that's going to be the case for a lot of these coaches. Not that New Orleans isn't an attractive destination. I know that there was a kind of a slam piece and talking about their situation and all that. And look, if you can get a coach that's committed, or from like a commitment from the organization to know that this isn't going to be fixed in a year, this isn't going to be fixed in 2 years, probably. If it does
Right.
get in 2 years, great. But for all intents and purposes, next season is going to be another struggle. Like, I'd be surprised if they would get to 7 wins if massive changes doesn't happen, all this other stuff. And it just feel like that's the direction that they would end up going. But you pointed out Aaron Glenn's qualities. Look, heck of a coach, heck of a motivator. Dude will get in your face. He will hold you accountable. But he's got the football IQ. He's got so much more talent to him. And I don't mean that as a knock to DA. DA was a fantastic defensive coordinator. He is, and that's probably where it should have stopped, is right. Like, he just shouldn't have been a head coach. He had a shot. He came in here, tried it, said the wrong things, all this stuff. I don't get the sense that that would be Aaron Glenn in a nutshell. But, I feel like Aaron Glenn carries himself a lot differently. You mentioned the NFL experience. I mean, he played a heck of a lot of football, right? And so I wouldn't be too upset with Aaron Glenn. I just don't think whoever it is, if it's Glenn, if it's Mike Vrabel, if it's Joe Brady, if it's, an outside candidate, I just don't know that they're coming into the best situation. And if I'm the front office, I need to have some, if I'm a coach with this front office, I need some assurances that I'm not going to get ousted after 1 year or 2 years because of the situation that the Saints have caused themselves.
Absolutely. And this is where like the Aaron Glenn factor gets to be really tricky to navigate, because if I'm Aaron Glenn, I love the idea of going back to New Orleans. I love the idea of going somewhere and working with a front office that knows me, that trusts me, that believes in me, all these other things, and it's willing to give me that opportunity. But I'm a little bit worried that I'm going to show up, spend 2 years coaching their team while they fix their salary cap, and then they're going to fire me and then go and sell a better situation to a younger, different head coach at that point. So
Right.
I'm with you 100%. I would absolutely need those assurances, because I do think that it's a little bit, I know the hit piece that you're talking about, I think it was a little short-sighted in terms of like, oh, these things are bad. Okay, well, they're gonna not be bad in like 2 years. So chill out. Like, this is the NFL life cycle. Like, everybody, we've seen this movie a million times. The only thing that's specific is that the Saints went over budget in terms of producing their movie. And so I think that the fact of the matter is that, like, what people tend to not factor into head coaching candidates when they say things like, oh, no coach would want this job or whatever. Remember that everybody said that about the Saints offensive coordinator position last year, and the Saints got one of the top 2 offensive coordinators. And the only one of the 2 offensive coordinators that were hired in last year's cycle that they interviewed that still actually has the job, guys like Shane Waldron and others, have already been fired. And so for New Orleans, like, I think the thing that we have to keep in mind is ego plays into these hires, right? Confidence, belief plays into these hires. And so any head coach that walks up to one of the 32 NFL teams out there and any head coach candidate that walks into one of the 32 teams out there and says, I don't want this job because I like my situation better, fine. But no one's usually going and saying, I don't want this job because your job offer is bad, or what the team of your condition is. Every thought process behind that is, I'm the one that can fix this. And that's usually the way that these types of conversations go. And remember, you're not just trying to sell the salary cap and the roster, you're selling control, you're selling patience, you're selling, different opportunities that you can provide, all these other things. It's more than just what does the roster look like and how far is the team over the salary cap. If those are the only 2 things that went into hiring a head coach, and the Saints would have no head coach going into next year. And I can promise you that won't be the case.
Right. And how much control is the head coach going to have? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, that's the
Which is
biggest
where
thing.
the Saints can really sell themselves big time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think so. And again, you look at all the situations. I'm not going to say you have a better situation in Chicago, or Raiders are probably open too. The Jets are another opening. I mean, there's going to be all these situations. I think that when you look at this situation, it's not going to be shocking. I know we've talked about this for months probably, and we've prepped you. It's not going to be surprising to us that Derek Carr is the quarterback of the Saints in 2025. It would not shock either of us, right? And
Yeah.
so it just means when you're looking at it, and Schefter put out a thing on it and saying that that's going to be obviously a big decision, but it seems like he's going to be back as the quarterback too. But you know, I just feel like going in tandem with everything, you put the defensive coach like a Glenn. You may keep the offensive staff and give them one more year to prove. You may change out some parts and pieces, still have Kubiak. I'm not saying that's the right answer. I'm just
Right.
putting on the team's hat and what I
Yep.
know about the team and their thought process and saying this is probably what's going to happen is Carr's the quarterback. Kubiak's going to get another shot at it. They'll bring in a defensive guy. It's probably Aaron Glenn, and they're going to try to improve, retool the roster enough to where they can compete for the division.
Yep.
That's the cycle that they're in, and that's the best that they can probably do right now.
Yep, I think you're absolutely right. I think you're absolutely right that that's very likely the situation. Now, obviously there's a chance that there's some small additions to that. Like, let me throw this one at you. Let's say that the Saints hire Aaron Glenn, they hold on to Klint Kubiak. Derek Carr is a starting quarterback, but then Aaron Glenn goes, you know what? I really, really liked Hendon Hooker when I was over in Detroit. He's not going to get any opportunities anytime soon. So why don't we roll the dice and see if we can get Hendon Hooker over to New Orleans? For me, right?
Yeah.
Just as your new head coach, like, can you do me that little favor? And then the Saints go out and try to, make a trade for Hendon Hooker. Then all of a sudden, things get a little bit interesting. I don't think Hendon Hooker ends up competing for your starting role with Derek Carr, but it ends up kind of throwing a wrench in what could be the succession plan post Derek Carr, because I don't think that Derek Carr gets another contract, right?
Right.
So that's where these things can get really, really interesting is, when that head coach says, I'm cool with Derek Carr, but I want this guy waiting in the wings. I want this guy to be ready for me and everything like that.
Mm.
That's where things can get really, really interesting, to where even though things kind of look the same, they wouldn't necessarily feel the same in terms of like what's lurking in the shadows, if you will.
And if I'm the next Saints head coach, if I'm pitching it, I'm laying out the plan, right?
Oh
Like I
yeah.
know we've heard about 6-hour interviews and all this other stuff. I'm laying out the plan. I'm going from step 1 to step 12 of the
Yeah.
entire full plan of the Saints, and that's got to be a point. Is here's what I want out of the quarterback spot. I understand financially, this is probably where you're at. I get it. This is where we're going to roll with. But following this year, or at least this year, this is kind of what I want to see. And maybe that means if they were to trade for a Hendon Hooker, he can at least compete with Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener, and then may the best person win who's going to be quarterback 2 or 3. You know what I mean? Like that just
Yeah.
might be how it is. And we know as well as everybody knows that quarterbacks just don't last long. I mean, look at the patience for first round quarterbacks. There's none. There is none. You either hit it or you don't. And by year 2 or 3, if you don't cut the mustard, you get traded or you're done, right? And so
Right.
I don't like as of right now, I don't like the free agent classes coming out. And Kirk
Mm-mm.
Cousins, no, let's put a stop on all that. That ain't gonna happen.
No,
All that
no,
other
no.
good stuff, but it's just fascinating because I do feel like the next 2 months for this team, maybe it's just realistically the next month of this team. I would be shocked if they don't have anybody in place by the end of January. But again, there's a lot of moving parts and pieces, and it's going to go from speed to execution really fast. And I think they got to be at least holding those conversations now to say, okay, when the Lions get in the playoff, if I'm doing Aaron Glenn's interview, I'm going to make sure to make those contacts, do what I got to do. I mean, that has to happen.
Yeah, you got to get that all set up. I don't know. I don't know what the timeline is going to be. That's going to be an interesting one because I mean, Detroit's a Super Bowl team, man.
Yeah,
Like
if they get there,
that's
right?
a
Yeah, that's a
yeah,
good
yeah,
that's
yeah.
a good quick call.
Like that's a Super Bowl team, and so that impacts your timeline a lot too. But here's where that gets scary. The Saints pushed that deep into the conversation to post Super Bowl for a head coach hire, and then Aaron Glenn says nah, and then goes somewhere else or stays in Detroit, and then your head coach pool has potentially dwindled. We don't know for sure that it will
Yeah.
by that time, but that's the risk that you take pushing things down the road. But I will say this: if that's your top candidate, you're willing to do that. You wait,
Mhm.
you go out there and you go and get the guy that you want to go out there and get. And because Ben Johnson's going to be in such, he's going to be such a highly desired head coach option, there's a chance that the coaching cycle as a whole doesn't really move until we figure out where he's going, if he's going anywhere. So that could work in the Saints' favor as well, that really the number one and number two candidates for this year's hiring cycle are probably both the Detroit Lions coordinators.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly with that. So, well, we've talked about head coaching a lot without giving away everything because we can put more shows dedicated to that. But let's take a quick break and we will actually talk about this matchup when we come back. Hey, folks, John Hendricks here, Second and Saints. Wanted to talk to you quickly about Underdog because it is the place to play if you're a sports fan looking to win money while watching sports. With over 5 million happy players and $2 billion won, Underdog makes it fun and easy to cash in on all your favorite athletes' performances. Compete against other players by just selecting higher or lower on 2 or more player stats, and you could win up to 1,000 times your money. So turn every touchdown into a win with Underdog. This season, Underdog is going to be running a special promo or bonus almost every single day, like profit boosts, discounts, or free picks. Plus, all new users get a free pick. You could win up to 1,000 times your money just by choosing higher or lower on player stats like passing yards, interceptions, touchdowns, and much more. Create entries with all football selections or mix and match across your favorite sports. Underdog puts the power to cash out in your hands. Now you can either keep riding with your entry or tap the Win Now button to cash out whenever you want. And with Underdog Rescues, you can get your money back and receive a promo if an early injury causes your entry to lose. With Underdog's Double Flex option, you can even take 2 L's and still have your entry to be a win. So go download the app today and use code Second Saints to get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. That's code Second Saints. Now here comes the legal jargon. Must be 18 or older, 19 and older in Alabama and Nebraska, 19 and older in Colorado for some games, 21 and older in Massachusetts and Arizona, and present in the state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. Arizona, 1-800-NEXT-STEP, 1-800-639-8783, or text NEXT STEP to 53342. New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. On Second and Saints, John Hendricks alongside Ross Jackson. Almost butchered my name there, but I forget who I am sometimes. But it happens.
Been there. Been there.
Yeah, no doubt, many a times. But also want to just thank Underdog as our sponsor as we close out 2025. This is our second to last show that they will be our sponsor. So 2025 is going to be pretty exciting. Kind of really excited to see what happens with that. And again, shameless plugs. First of all, don't forget to hit like, subscribe. But if you know anybody, especially in the Gulf Coast, New Orleans area, we're went to talk about sponsorships, be sure to hit us up. We will absolutely talk with you about that. That's good stuff. But Ross, as we were talking about obviously the coaching stuff. That was a big hot button. That's going to be a hot button, right? And all that other good stuff. But looking at this game for the Saints, 5-10, completely out of this. Obviously, there's not much more to play for other than pride. I mean, it's just your last regular season home game in front of the Superdome crowd. This could be the last game for a lot of guys in black and gold, right? You know, you wonder about what's the future of Cam Jordan? What's the future for, Tyrann Mathieu? Again, I don't take anything for granted. Demario Davis, I believe that Demario will be back, but there's obviously an acclimation period. They want to take the time to see if they want to continue playing football. That's obviously a big thing. But some of the guys with contracts and free agents and stuff, some aren't going to be back. Some are just not going to be given an offer to come back. You know what I mean? And so it's an important game for, them. Obviously, these next 2 games or these final 2 games, if you will. But it's Spencer Rattler starting. No Alvin Kamara, still with that groin injury, although he is making some progress. Probably going to see him in the season finale. No Derek Carr at practice, still making progress. I know people have kind of said, why isn't he on IR? Maybe he plays in the finale. Maybe he doesn't. That's kind of been an interesting situation. But what do you make of this? Because obviously the Raiders and the Saints aren't great, Bob, right? And so,
right.
What are you looking for out of this one? Because again, if you're a fan, you've seen the broadcast market. It's struggle bus, right? And of course, it makes sense.
Yeah. And I'll say real quick, too, there's no reason to put Derek Carr on injury reserve. Absolutely no reason to do that. There was no reason to do that. It doesn't matter. People get so hung up on the idea of they could have used that roster move for something. What? Name one.
Put Ben DiNucci on the roster?
I mean, right. What are we doing? What are we doing? Especially with the way that the practice squad now works, adding a guy to the practice squad, as we see here this week, actually, with Clyde Edwards-Helaire coming in and being elevated for this game. He will make his debut as a New Orleans Saints running back, which he told me is a dream come true, by the way. What a cool dude. But that's not having put Derek Carr on injured reserve doesn't mean that you win games somehow towards the end of the year. It doesn't make any sense. But anyway, I digress from that. The thing that I'm looking at mostly in this game is the fact that like this is yet another opportunity to continue to try to get a full or as complete as you can an evaluation on Spencer Rattler as a potential starting quarterback in the league. He's 0-4 for starts right now, but I wrote down the numbers. Has played all 4 of his games effectively without Eric McCoy, right? 7 snaps with Eric McCoy in last week's game. Has played 3 games without Taysom Hill, 3 games without Rashid Shaheed. These are just the starts. 2 starts were without Chris Olave, 2 starts were without Cesar Ruiz, 1 start without Alvin Kamara, and 1 start without Lucas Patrick. His next start will be without Chris Olave, Eric McCoy, Rashid Shaheed, Taysom Hill, Alvin Kamara, and Lucas Patrick. So this is why the Saints continue to give him more opportunities, because they know that what they're putting around him is not actually giving you the ability to have a full evaluation of him. There are some things that he's got to work on, getting the ball out a little bit quicker under pressure, stuff like that. Got to start to make the defense you got to start to force a defense to not want to blitz you, to not want to send a bunch of pressure at you. And that's just going to take reps. So I think the Saints are doing the right thing here by continuing with Spencer Rattler while Derek Carr is out. So that will be a big part of the evaluation process that I think we're going to be watching. And then the biggest name in this game, however, that I'm going to be watching is going to be Brock Bowers. Not just because he's a tight end and people have this idea that the Saints can't guard tight ends. They've allowed just the 14th most yards to tight ends, so they're barely below average in the NFL. And they're one of only 2 teams to allow less than 2 touchdowns to a tight end in the league. Them and the Chargers are the only teams to allow just 1. But it's the yards after catch, John. It's the yards after catch that, to me, make him the most important player in this game.
Man, I was thinking back to our draft stuff, and I remember the Brock Bowers talk. We talked about him, knowing that Fuanga was going to be the one that makes sense. We called that one, but man, what a killer player, right? Like between him and I remember I had a huge crush on Tavondre Sweat, and I know his RAS score sucked, all this other stuff. It's like, it doesn't matter. Look how he's playing in Tennessee. You know what I mean? It just proved that this college stuff, it's just wild, right? But yes, Brock Bowers is probably one of the most electric players that we're going to see on the football field, right? And I'm curious to see how they defend against him. And of course, this is about Spencer Rattler making a start. Hopefully see more of Kendre Miller. You know what I mean? That was a really bizarre way that transpired against him.
Yeah.
I think for Rattler, the biggest thing is have some poise in the pocket, right? Like his clock might be going faster than what it should be going, but get some rhythm into the game here. You're playing at home. I think that's going to bode pretty well for him. Again, I think the formula for the rookie quarterbacks is something I've yet to see, is getting them comfortable early. Like, that's the big thing. And the way you do that is the run game, the short passing game, short to intermediate stuff. I get it. The receiver situation last week was crazy, right? And Marquez Valdez-Scantling, he was easily the best one out there on the field, but you're working with Dante Pettis and Kevin Austin Jr. and Mason Tipton, and it's just, they don't have all the reps, I guess, if you will. It's some of these other guys, like you pointed out with some of these top guys. I thought the tight ends could elevate themselves a little bit more last week against the Packers, but everything went wrong in that game. But, again,
went right there.
It's a chance again to see and get information on this team, to make some more future assessments of them. Obviously, you mentioned McCoy and Patrick. They both went to injured reserve. Kyle Hergel, somebody we thought that would obviously get the call up on the active roster. Him and Isaiah Stallberg, shout out to him, getting on the active roster for sure. And then, you mentioned Clyde Edwards-Helaire and Austin Deculus is going to be on there as far as another elevation on the practice squad. So, look,
a couple of LSU Tigers.
Couple of LSU guys, and right. So you mentioned younger guys. If Nathan Shepard can't go, I want to see more Christian Boyd. I want to see more of this draft class out there. I want to see more Jalen Ford out there. Again, I'm not saying that Pete Werner shouldn't play or DeMario shouldn't play, but I think this is a good time to say, let's look at what we really have on this young roster. And again, you're not going to make an evaluation based off this one game, but I think going into the offseason, it makes it to where, okay, we can have some different conversations to say, maybe this guy we want more elevation from. I mean, you guys remember a guy like Anthony Orji, he was a practice squad guy all year, and then he got his chance and opportunity. It's mainly special teams, but he's played. Nephi Sewell, he balled out that one time when he was playing against the Lions, and then he got hurt against the Bucks and stuff. So they have those gems on the roster, I believe, but patience is one thing, and they got to get some eyeballs on how they play in a game situation too.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think the signing of Isaiah Stallbird to the active roster is an interesting one. It's one that I think harkens back to what Darren Rizzi was talking about earlier on this week around the idea that they're going to look over the roster, get a look at players that haven't gotten a lot of playing time or that haven't had playing time in a while, and then try to get those guys on the field that they feel like they want to get a greater evaluation of. I think Isaiah Stallbird checks that box. Keep in mind that Isaiah Stallbird has not been working with the linebackers since Darren Rizzi has taken over interim head coach. He's been with the safeties. So I wonder how much his elevation to the active roster also has to do with Rico Payton. Not, he popped up on the injury report on Friday with an illness. Will he be ready to go? Will he not be ready to go? Because what the Saints could do is use Willie Gay at gunner, something that they've done with a lot of success if Rico Payton can't go. And then Isaiah Stallbird takes Willie Gay's spot in the punt coverage on special teams. I think no matter what, punt coverage, special teams is where you're going to see Isaiah Stallbird the most, but he's probably going to be with that DB group when he's, coming out on the field, when he's warming up, when he's on the sideline, all those other things. And so if he got called into action as a defender, it'd be him getting called in as a safety. I don't anticipate that happening with so many safeties up ahead of him, but he's going to play a big special teams role. So it's an interesting, opportunity just to see greater evaluation when it comes to some of these younger guys that are going to be out there. You mentioned Spencer Rattler showing more poise in the pocket and stuff like that. I got a couple of numbers that I want to run over. This is a little bit reductive because I'm going to play the game of like, if you replace this with this, then the number now is this, and that's not as easy to actually see happen in real life. But let's just play the game for a little bit. The Saints right now, when it comes to the two quarterbacks that have taken the most snaps for them, that's Derek Carr and Spencer Rattler, of course. Derek Carr has been under pressure 31.3% of the time. Spencer Rattler 39.3% of his dropbacks, so an 8% difference. Not too massively different, but that includes not just Rattler starts, that also includes like the second half against Washington and stuff like that. Here are the numbers that I think are the most important numbers when it comes to this. Derek Carr, when under pressure, gets the ball out in 3.06 seconds. Spencer Rattler, a full 0.4 of a second later than that, right? So 3.46. So that I think is a big one. You look at the sacks that they have taken, 8 sacks for Derek Carr, 17 sacks for Spencer Rattler, despite half the amount of starts, right? Half the amount of game appearances. And then finally, comparing that number to the throwaway number. Derek Carr has thrown the ball away on 13 passes, on 13 dropbacks under pressure. Spencer Rattler just 5 times while under pressure. So that's a 12 play difference. So if you were to swing 12 sacks off of Spencer Rattler's ledger and apply them to not 12, I'm sorry, 8. My numbers.
I was wondering, I'm like,
not great.
I wasn't going to call it out. And I was like,
No.
I'm trying to figure out how that math, but
no, I appreciate that. 8. Sorry about that. So you swing those 8 sacks off of his 17 sack total. It's 9 sacks, and then he's thrown the ball away 13 times. And so it's just that's a little reductive because you can't really. There's no chance where you'd be able to go through the tape and pick out 8 sacks that he took to where you could say he had time to throw the ball away. He could have thrown the ball away. He was in the right place to throw the ball away, things like that. But if you're able to add a little bit of that to the game in terms of understanding where the pressure is coming from, knowing that the pressure is coming, and then, aborting some of the plays early at the feet of the receiver or getting outside of the pocket, things like that, then I think that like those are places where you want to see his composure under pressure in the play, because he's great in the huddle and at the line of scrimmage. But during the play, if you want to see that a way that composure can be kind of seen and translated on the field, that would be a way that you'd be able to see it, and it would remove some of those negative plays and then just take you to the next down so you live to fight another down, which is what everybody wants to do in the NFL. So that would be something that I would be specifically looking for when it comes to Spencer Rattler, is using those legs a little more, but then making the decision to throw the ball away as opposed to take a sack when that option is available, which is not always, but when that option is available.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to hit a home run every single time.
Right.
And the thing is, I get it. You want to make something happen, do all these other stuff. You extend the play with your legs, good things can happen. Hell, and you see what happens against the Saints when that happens. You know what I mean? Like, it always happens on the other way. But, again, I think if you can get him comfortable and settled and come up with a game plan that he can execute as
Hmm.
a rookie. I'm not saying he can't handle more or anything like that, but give him something that he can handle and execute on that's going to help him build some confidence. And then you can start stacking from there, if you will. Again, I just, that's how I see it. You know what I mean?
Yep.
I just think that that's his a best friend, and look at some of the rookie quarterbacks and the success they've had. Sean Payton, he establishes a good game plan for Bo Nix. You know what I mean? And Bo Nix
Right.
can go out there and execute that game plan, and he's got some support around him to help. I think he's got a lot more support around him right now to help too. But for New Orleans, it's just one of those that you're just really looking at how things go, right? Like, can you
Yeah.
put points up on the board? Can you put some drives together? This is an inferior opponent for all intents and purposes. You're gonna probably still hold on to the 10th draft pick after this game too, still. But it's, can you show up against an inferior opponent? We know you can against a bigger opponent, but can you show up against the inferior opponent, get some confidence back going into the season finale? Can you play spoilers against the Bucks? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just, that's the tough part, is I don't know what's going to happen. But I'll tell you this though, defensively, when you have 27 plays and 2 drives, that's just not going to cut it either. So I just feel like that also puts an extra pressure on the offense, where you give up a 10-play drive, a touchdown, and then you go out 3 and out, and you do a 17-play drive and then a touchdown, and then you go 3 and out or whatever it is. That's not winning football, right? And again,
Right.
defense has to play better. I feel like they can play better in this game. I expect some better pressure packages on this one, but this is really, I don't think, a crazy formula to beat as an inferior team. Can they execute? That's my only question.
Yep. That's gonna be it, man. And can you find some life in this offense if the run game can't get going? Can you find some life in this offense? Like, I don't know. I feel like we haven't talked about enough all throughout the season, not just us, but like as a whole. We haven't talked enough about how underwhelming the Saints offense has been. Whether it's because of its predictability in certain cases, like the third and short pitches and that gimmick, like it worked a couple times and then they continue to go back to it, it doesn't work. The identifiers that come with Adam Prentice being on the field, or Dallin Holker being on the field, or when this player's in motion, how often they do, how often that results in these things. Their 2nd and 10 play calling, those types of things. Like, there's been a predictability to their defense and to their offense, and I think that has a lot to do with the injuries, right? Like, you can only do so much with all of the backup guys that you
Right.
have out there, but the backup guys have been starters for multiple games now. So at some point, you'd like to see things tick in the right direction under those guys. And so I think it's time for Klint Kubiak to kind of show that as well, because there's just not an excuse anymore. Like, I understand it's not Chris Olave, it's not Rashid Shaheed, but you've gotten several starts out of Kevin Austin Jr., you've gotten several starts out of Marquez Valdez-Scantling, you've gotten several starts now, with this tight end group. You had a whole season with this tight end group. You had a whole season with some of these guys on the offensive line, and still an inability to be able to pivot, produce, adjust if that run game isn't happening. And so I think that that's a big thing that I'm looking for in this game too, is like you mentioned, it's an inferior opponent, but by all intents and purposes, when it comes to passing offense versus passing defense, rushing offense versus rushing defense, the Raiders defense ranks better.
Mm-hmm.
So you have an opportunity out here to go and do something against a unit that ranks, at least on these kind of like high level major statistics, team statistics, that ranks better than you. So can you do it? And can you show that you can do things without everything going perfectly? And so far, that's what the kind of offensive experience has been for New Orleans. And again, I acknowledge that some of that has to do with the injuries, and I'm sure the injuries have a lot of impact on that. You don't really have your full playbook available to you, but with so many players now having so many starts, you should have at least started seeing some kind of improvement, and we have not seen that.
Yeah, I think that's what's been most disappointing now about the Darren Rizzi tenure. Like, I get it, you go aggressive, they've been interesting, but last Monday night, or in the Monday night game, it just looked like they weren't ready for anything. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, it
Yeah.
just looked like a cluster, and it was a train wreck. I mean, it was just all the things. And look, I don't know that single game is what's gonna maybe get Darren Rizzi not the head coach of this team next going forward, but if is there any saving grace for him if he beats the Raiders and he beats the Bucks? I don't know. I
No, I
don't
don't
really
think
think
so.
that's the case. But at the same time, that's going to end up being another one that you're going to have to replace, is that special team staff, because he's
Mhm.
not going to stay on. You know what I mean? He's just simply not going to stay on when it's all said and done. And and Riz has a lot to do with it. If you lose a Darren Rizzi, he's one of the most active guys when it comes to scouting and all this other stuff. When you look at Rashid Shaheed, Darren Rizzi leading that charge, a Charlie Smith and Isaiah Stallbird. A lot of these guys, these undrafted guys, are because of Darren Rizzi. I'm just letting you know, like
Deontay
that's
Hardy
just how
too.
it goes. Yep, Deontay Hardy back in the day. I mean, there's a laundry list of them that they are able to go find. Now, I don't know how that works in the offseason, but I mean, again, this is the final 2 games for Rizzi as interim head coach here, and I'd love to say that I think that they're going to go out with a bang here in New Orleans in front of the crowd, which I expect to be pretty sparse and such. But
It's
what
gonna
do
be a
you
lot of
think? How
Raiders
does this going
fans.
to play? Yeah, I
Gonna be a lot
completely
of Raiders
expect to see
fans.
a lot of silver and black.
Yeah, considering how much burgundy and gold we saw against the Commanders, knowing how like you don't have to travel as a Raiders fan, you just kind of are where you are because there's so many all over the country. Yeah, I expect to see a lot of silver and black. Look, I think the Saints are going to be able to pull this one out. Like they should. Let me say it that way. They should win this game.
Right.
And for the most part, Darren Rizzi's teams have won the games that they should win. They have not been able to stand up to the opponents that they're outmatched by, but I don't feel like they're outmatched by the Las Vegas Raiders. And so I think the Saints will win here. There's no reason not to. They're not going to improve their draft position, like you mentioned earlier. They're the only 5-11 team in the NFL. So you either then become one, you know what I mean? So it makes it tough for you to be able to drop or move much and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that the Saints can win this game. It would be Spencer Rattler's first win. And I think that he's the reason. Like if they win, it's going to be because of him and his play. And that could be because he goes out there and has like a superhero game. That's not really what I'm suggesting. I just mean that like he has a game that is a game manager type of a situation, is able to kind of, get some of those little negative plays out, the sacks and things like that. I think he's been sacked on 24.3% pressure to sack rate. They compare that to 8.5 for Derek Carr, for instance. You know what I mean? So it's like those negative plays are the ones I'm talking about. And then, in offense, the Raiders are awful. Like they're the worst rushing offense in the NFL. And so unless the New Orleans defense gifts them a run game, they might have some trouble holding on to the football for too long. So that should be the way that this one goes. I think the Raiders are favored on the road in
1
this
point.
game. Yeah. But I'll take the Saints in this one, but it's not because I think that they're about to, finish strong over the course of the last 2 years. Like I'm going to pick the Bucks next week, over the course of these last 2 weeks, not years. I'm sorry. But I'm going to pick the Bucks next week. It's just like, this is a circumstance where it feels like, yeah, the Saints are bad, but man, the Raiders are much, much worse.
Yeah, I would agree. I don't think this is a high scoring game. I think it's like a 20-14. Maybe if that, I take the under in this one probably, but I can't pick against the Saints in this one just because of the inferior opponent. I'm like you. I'm going to tell you now. It's Tampa next week. I don't care what happens. I don't care if they're in a position to say they win, they knock Tampa out of the playoffs. Like I just don't think it's going to happen, right? And so, and we didn't pick them against Green Bay. I don't think we picked them against Washington. It's just all these other things. Like you just see the writing on the wall. Like this is a chance. This game is what it is. It's a chance to, there's no personal investment in this one, right? Like they can't do anything by losing really, and they can't do anything by winning, right? Like it just doesn't help them one way or another. It's just a chance to get more information. And I think the Saints will come out and win this game. I don't think it's going to be pretty. I think it's going to come down to, the fine details and can the Saints offense do enough? And I feel like the answer is yes, they'll do enough because the Raiders are just so bad offensively. Right.
Yeah.
And so anyways, but again, we've been proven wrong plenty of times this season.
Hey.
So, well, we'll see. I mean, it's crazy to think that this team could finish 6-11, how everything started. And it's even crazier to think that they could finish 5-12. You know what I mean? If they don't win this game. And so that would just be insane. And Captain Insano from Waterboy, right? So that just what it'd be, exactly what it'd be. All right, so my man, as we wind this one down, what you got coming up on Locked On and LouisianaSports.net?
Yeah. So over Locked On, I'll do one more episode today, just like a final primer, kind of covering some of the things that you and I spoke about here with elevations and stuff like that. And then over at LouisianaSports.net, I dropped my column last night / this morning, around how the Saints are desperately trying to get a real beat on on the development and evaluation of Spencer Rattler and why they're struggling to do it and why it has very little to do with Spencer Rattler himself. So that was kind of the big piece that I put out this week. And then other than that, 5 things to know going into the game will be coming out Saturday night. And then I'm going to drop an Isaiah Stallbird feature Sunday morning before he takes the field as an active roster participant on Sunday. What you got coming up over at Saints News Network?
Very nice. I love it on the Rattler stuff and Stallbird. I mean, guys, go back to those episodes. That was one of my guys. I loved him. And I just think that there's still some development to be had in a lot of these guys, but I still feel good about where direction they can go. And that's actually one of the things I'm working on too, is some of the young pieces, the building blocks. Now, I'm not saying that, these undrafted rookies or anything that are going to be those cornerstones or anything like that, but just really honing in on the young talent. What do the Saints have? Where do they need to get better? And what type of direction do they need to pull, to get there, right? I think that's part of it. I'm also working on I kind of alluded to my head coach pick. I'm doing my play GM for the Saints. This is exactly how I'd go from picking my coach to what I'm doing in the restructure department, to all the free agents I'm keeping, to what I'm looking at and prioritizing in the draft, and probably looking at what I'm doing in free agency too. I love to put in the driver's seat just because nobody cares about my opinion in the Saints organization. Fans might, but again, my head coach pick is not probably, you wouldn't be surprised, but I've got 2 in mind, at least my top 3 bucket list, but I've got 2 in mind. One of them you wouldn't be surprised by. The other one you may be surprised by, but fans would be like, huh? You know what I mean? Probably. That's kind of the thing about it. So really working on that at SI and such, in addition to the normal game coverage. And probably just mention this now too, but Ross and I aren't going to be in Tampa. Ross has an awesome opportunity to host the Saints pregame show and all that other postgame show when it's all said and done over there from their studio. So we're going to probably do our live simulcast type thing. I'll definitely be here for sure. And I know Ross is going to jump in when he can, but it'll be fun to watch along that. But look, it's exciting times. I think the off season, I know people are like, I don't care, I'm not invested, but that's the time I think where people like Ross and I set ourselves apart from others, because this is the time where, you got to be creative with what you come up with content wise and just how you're thinking about it. And that's the stuff that fans want to know about, is where's this team going, what they're going to do. And we'll have end of year pressers and all that other stuff. That'll be fascinating to watch what Mickey Loomis has to say too, right?
Man,
you get him, but it's all that other stuff. But man, what a ride it's been this year so far and this season. When we were doing training camps, man, I just don't think I ever saw this coming.
Just
don't.
Yeah, I took the Saints to be under 7.5 wins.
You did.
Yeah, but I didn't expect it to look like this. I knew it was going to be injuries, though. That was the one thing that I knew. It was going to be getting the offense under their belt, which really wasn't an issue, at least at one point. And then it was the injuries, and it's just decimated this team.
And again, I wrote this too on the things that they should take away this season and they can take away from the season. Injuries were not their only problem. And if they sit and hide behind that, that is a massive failure. You cannot.
Very true.
So it just happens, but I'm going to get off that soapbox. But look, guys, really appreciate you tuning into our Second and Saints show. Don't forget to hit that like, subscribe button. A lot of cool stuff coming down the pipeline as we get closer to the off season, but we'll be back on Sunday to do our post game. And then we got one more of these games to kind of talk about. Then it's going to be off season mode and it's going to be a doozy. Also, make sure to stick here with Ross and I, follow him on Locked On, and support LouisianaSports.net and check out Saints News Network for all the coverage for Saints. And of course, if you ever see us out and you're at the game or anything, let us know, because we'll come check you out and say hey and all that fun stuff. We've met some great fans and supporters of the show. I missed that live show we did in Los Angeles. That was such a fun time. Like our 2024 replay bucket list. I just there's so many good memories from this show and what we've been able to do this year. But anyways, on behalf of Ross, I'm going to say thank you so much, and he can say it too. No, I'm not sorry. I'm not going to put you on the spot. No, just kidding.
No, thank you. Seriously. Absolutely. Thank you. We appreciate all of the support and all the love. It means the world.
Definitely. Yes, we do. Definitely. So much. Just giving 2 regular guys that love covering this team a platform is just something amazing, right? So, but that's going to do it for us. Definitely thank you so much for tuning in. We will talk at you very soon. John Hendricks on behalf of Ross Jackson signing out.
Love you.